Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dial the Gates. My name is David Reed. This is the Stargate Oral History Project. I apologize for running the wrong title sequence at the beginning. As you can tell, Michael Welsh is going to be joining us soon, but that's going to be for this Wednesday, not right now. Paul Mullie, writer, executive producer, Stargate SG-1, Atlantis Universe. He is joining us, and we're going to dive into several of his shows today and ask him some questions. You're more than welcome to submit some on your own, and I'm going to tell you how to do that in just a moment here. But first, if you like Stargate and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, it would mean a great deal if you click that like button. It makes a difference with YouTube and will continue to help the show grow. Please also consider sharing this video with a Stargate friend, and if you want to get notified about future episodes, click that subscribe icon. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this live stream will be released over the course of the next few weeks on the Dial the Gate and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. As this is a live stream, we have Paul Mullie joining us here now. So my team over in the YouTube chat will be taking your questions, gathering them together, and we'll have a few of them over for Paul at the end of the episode. Paul Mullie, executive producer and writer of Stargate. Sir, thank you so much for being back with me. It's a pleasure to have you. How are you? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Hang on just a second here. Let me try this. We were working earlier. Can you hear me now? All right. Hang on, guys. I appreciate your patience. I think it may be on your end, Paul. It was working earlier. But you can't hear me, or you can hear me? You can hear me. You cannot hear me. Well, this is new. This was just working. Apologize, folks. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Give me just one moment, everybody. We're going to disconnect and then reconnect. All right. Give me just a moment here. Appreciate y'all's patience. This is what happens when you do live shows. Sooner or later, something comes up and it's like, oh, okay. Let's try this one again. Microphone testing. Testing sounds good. Okay. Testing speakers. Okay, that's good. Thanks, everyone, for waiting. Give me just a moment here. See, when you produce live shows, you have to be prepared for anything to happen. Let me see here. Wait for him to come back on. What's this, episode number 183? And I think this is our first. I haven't had like a malfunction in at least like this one in at least 50 of them. So I'm always Raj Luthra. Always start with the basics. Did you turn it off and on again? Yes, I did. All right. So who all has seen Star Trek Picard Season 3? It's pretty good, right? So it's just about as perfect fan service as you can possibly get. I was very, very pleased. So, okay. Just a second, folks. Hey, can you log back in? Yes. Okay. This is my first live reconnect in 183 interviews, so I consider that a win. So, yep. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. The strange thing, it was, I've never had it like work and then suddenly not work. That was very strange. So, and see, this is why people turn into live shows, just like they go to NASCAR races. They want to see the crashes. So exactly right. Maybe it'll be in my turn. So trouble in turn 3. Okay. Still waiting for it to show on my end. And you clicked on the link? Okay. There you go. I see. Let's try this again. Connecting with audio.
Unmute.
There we go.
Okay.
Paul, we can hear you.
Fantastic. I can hear you too.
Okay. Let's get started and hope that we're good.
It doesn't happen again.
Exactly right. Okay. All right. So we just had our Apollo 13 moment, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Stargate.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's just jump right into this here. You guys broke so many shows, went through so many drafts, and then hammered everything out into over 350 hours of television. Can you please, as in the simplest terms as possible, describe the steps that you went through from initial conversations to final draft of a typical hour of Stargate?
Okay. Well, there weren't necessarily typical episodes because it depended on what kind of story it was. Because some of the stories were very much by committee, especially the bigger two-parters, anything that had to do with like continuing stories, ongoing arcs, stuff like that. But really the big budget two-parters, the big, end of season or mid-season two-parters, they were really like, Joe and I wrote a lot of those, but we didn't necessarily come up with the ideas for those. Mm-hmm. Those were done in the room. We knew sort of where the arcs needed to go, right? We needed to deal with certain, whether it was, Apophis is coming to Earth and is going to be a big battle or whatever, so those stories were very much broken as a group. Not just broken as a group, they were all broken as a group, but sort of conceived almost more as a group. The one-off episodes, the episodes that didn't necessarily have to do with any big ongoing stories, and some of the smaller episodes, those weren't always like this, but they tended to be more individual ideas. Like somebody would just come in with an idea. Brad would always have an image. Brad was the image guy. He would walk into the office in the morning and say, "I had an image," and it would literally be an image. It would be he thought very visually a lot of the time, and so we would build a story around, he would have an idea for a story, but then, or I would, like, a lot of my stories were, especially the one-off ones, they were just what I would call sort of sci-fi ideas, like I don't know, what if, like Scorched Earth. We talked about Scorched Earth last time. That was a pure sci-fi idea. That was just, okay, terraforming a planet, but it's aliens terraforming the planet to make it right for them. So there's a twist on the whole terraforming idea. So that's the genesis essentially of that story. I had that idea, or any other ones. Once we were, unfortunately, that's not a good example because we weren't actually in Vancouver at the time. We were still in Montreal. We hadn't yet gone on the show. That was kind of one of the original pitches. We did wind up breaking that in the room, I think. I don't know. Actually, we wrote a draft before we even went to Vancouver. So, but other ones down the line that I did were, like that as well, where I would just kind of get a science fiction idea and come in and pitch it and be like, okay, I have an idea for X, Y, or Z. Like, I don't know, like the episode where Mitchell remembers murdering somebody. So somebody implanted a memory of murdering a woman in his mind. Okay, so that's like a sci-fi idea kind of thing. So somebody would come in with an idea, whether it was me or Joe or Brad or Robert. Like I said, Brad had a lot of images, and we would then work together to break the story, but that would be sort of more that person's story, and then they would write that episode, whoever came up with the initial idea. Usually, not always. Sometimes Brad came up with ideas and then didn't write them, because he was super busy, and sometimes he'd let us write some of where. So I think we shared story credit with him on a few things along the way. Joe and I never bothered to worry about credit. So if it was my idea or his idea, we would just put both our names on it. We never really worried about that. And even after a while, we were writing separately, and we still didn't bother to say this one's written by Joe and this one's written by Paul. It was just written by both of us. We knew we had sort of an even workload, and we weren't going to argue about who was going to get paid more for this, because as you know, as a sole writer, you would get paid more. But we always knew it was going to kind of work out to be fairly even. So we didn't worry about that. But yeah, so somebody had to have an idea. So that's the start of a lot of those stories, is somebody came in with an idea, a pitch. That's sort of, the beginning part. It got harder to do that as the show went on, especially in terms of the one-offs. Those got harder. The arc, anything that had to do with a big series arc, those actually got easier in a way, because there was just so much stuff out there, that we had done. So the more the mythology built, the more stuff we could kind of go back to and say, well, we remember this planet and this guy, they're still out there. We could do a story with them. And so in a way, the weight of the show generated its own stories after a while. Just because there was so much material out there. There were so many characters and so many stories out there. But the one-offs, those got tricky because it's like, how many science fiction ideas can you come up with? Just
in many respects, you're starting from square one.
Sort of science fiction ideas. They get hard, especially when you're watching Star Trek at the same time, and you don't want to just copy them. And they're doing a billion episodes. They did a lot of those kind of one-off just pure sci-fi stories too. So after a while, it's like, oh my God. I remember Joe and I like freaking out at the end of the 5th, I think it was season 5, going, how are we going to keep writing this show? There's no more ideas. We've already done, 100 episodes at that point. I remember Larry David saying that about after the first season of Seinfeld, that he heard they were picked up and he started crying because he was so afraid that they wouldn't have any more ideas. And then they wrote, I don't know how many seasons did they write after that.
It's extraordinary. He had everything handed in his lap, and you think he would be extremely happy, that his life has been made, but no, he's just freaking out that he can never pull this off. Has no self-confidence.
If you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, you get the sense that it's difficult for him to be happy in general.
Right. Exactly.
That he's the kind of person who has to almost pathologically ruin his own happiness. But I totally understood what he was saying. Like you get to that point where you're like, oh my God, how are we gonna?
Right.
This is impossible. But we kept going. So
typically, how many drafts would you have?
Was that?
Typically, how many drafts would you have?
So what would happen? So we would get the idea. So someone would have an idea. Then we would break it in the room. Breaking essentially just means finding the act breaks first and foremost. So, and then finding the beats per act. So you got to remember, this was before streaming. So these were written with commercial breaks built in. I don't know if people nowadays who are writing streamed shows, if they do act breaks, like consciously on the pit, like literally write them on act 4, act 5. We did the tease in 5 acts, right? And they were designed for commercial breaks. And so the whole point was you had to end on something interesting. You had to end an act on either an action beat or a mystery beat or a big surprise or something. And this goes back to like the beginning of television, to the early days of television. And the thinking was, if you go to commercial and the person isn't super engaged and going, oh, I can't wait to see what happens next, they're going to change the channel or wander off to the fridge and forget to come back or whatever. So you had to build these moments that were like, oh, I really need to see what happens next. So they would be patient and sit through the commercials, right? And you would come back. TV is completely different now. Although I think if I was writing, even if it was a stream show without commercial breaks, I'd still write act breaks because it's a very good way to structure your story, and it keeps things moving, and you have these you're forced to do these moments that are these kind of like, oh shit, or I'm sorry,
you're fine,
oh my god moments,
yeah,
that keep the story moving and keep the audience, engaged throughout, as opposed to letting like a half hour go by before anything really, you get caught up in a really heavy dialogue scene or something and all this, and then you forget, oh, this is, we've been sort of dwelling on this for too long, we need to move on. The act breaks really force you to do that. So that's what we would do. That's what breaking the story meant, essentially. We would write it, we'd put it on a whiteboard. I normally did the writing on the whiteboard. Joe's writing was way too, I don't know if you've ever tried to read any of Joe's handwriting. No, it's not. He's got the worst. He even can't read it. I'd be like, what does this say? I'd hand him his own writing and he'd be like, I have no idea. I don't know what that says. And I believe Brad was left-handed.
Oh, no.
So a whiteboard, you can't, because your hand erases what you've written.
Right.
The meat of your hand is like following you across and wiping. So that was always an issue. So I think I wound up doing a lot of the actual just physically write out, like, okay, so what's the first beat in Act 1? And open it to the room. Anybody have any ideas? I mean, we know what the story is. We know, okay, so this story is going to start in the briefing room. They often did, or something like that, and they're going to talk. Or, we did teases. So teases were, they had to grab you right away, right? So that was a very important part of the writing process. What's the tease going to be? Usually that was pretty easy, coming up with the tease, because it was central to the story. It was built into whatever your idea for the story was. What was often, the tease was often sort of obvious. Mm-hmm. We always wound up having not enough acts. Like that was like the continuous problem of breaking stories, was like, we'd all be sitting around looking at the board and we'd be like, we've only got 4 acts. And, like we were always an act short. That was just to drive us crazy. So we'd have to like try to make sure that we had all those things working in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 acts. Then you need a certain number of beats per act. Beats are just kind of not necessarily scenes. They could be scenes or just kind of moments that sort of little logical jumps in the story from this to this to this to this. And you usually need like 4 or 5 beats per act to get around the right length. Mm-hmm. So you could look at the story on the board and realize that you were short or that you were long or that it wasn't, you could sort of see where the problems were. And luckily we had a group of people who were very good. So if I didn't have the answer, hopefully somebody else would have the answer, that was the whole point of the room, right? Like we're working together. It's maybe one person's idea, but it was very rare for somebody to come in and just know all the beats, just know all the act breaks. And I suppose it probably did happen occasionally, but what I remember most is the struggles. It was like, oh God, this is really good, but we're missing one thing, something's missing. And somebody would have to, come up with an idea to fix it. Rob was very good. I remember Rob was very good at keeping the meeting going, like because there's moments where you just kind of lose momentum and you're all just sitting there going, oh no, we don't have an answer for this. And he would sort of just keep talking, like almost just throw things out just to keep the momentum moving. And he was very good at keeping the room going, because if you don't have that kind of a person in the room, often they'll just kind of stall. And, right. And then you're thinking about other things. You start talking about what we're going to have for lunch. And I remember a lot of discussions about lunch. The mornings, I don't know how much work we got done in the mornings because a lot of it was about lunch. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I would think, part of me would be like, okay, lunch. Let's talk about lunch so that we can, because for as far as I'm concerned, a lot of my ideas come to me when I turn away from them for a little bit, and then they occur. Sure. So it's not like you're deliberately avoiding.
Sure. And you can't force it, right? Like I said, Rob was very good at keeping the meeting going so we wouldn't lose momentum, but you can't just, okay, we need an idea right now. If nothing's happening, nothing's happening. If it's not happening, you're right. We could leave, go. There was always other stuff to do. There was producer duties. Somebody had to go go to set or go to the editing room or whatever. So we didn't always just sit down and like we had heard what appeared to me to be horrible stories of other rooms where people would stay till like 10 o'clock at night or midnight trying to break stories, and just like they sounded like torture chambers where these people would just like force themselves. We were pretty lazy. It felt like we were I mean, we were writing a lot, but we kept very good hours. Brad and Robert insisted on not doing that kind of a room. They wanted to, they had their lives and they had families, and they knew that, we had stuff to go home to. So it was not like there was no slave driving going on. But I don't know, we just had the right combination of people to get over these little humps that would happen. And they always happen in every story. There's always a moment where like, what do you do? Like I said, it's very rare for it all to just kind of go boom, 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 boom. Well, that was easy. There's always a moment where you're like, oh, how do we fix this? And, that's why it's good to be in a group of people, right? It's not just up to you. When you're in a room, you're all working together to I also heard stories like, I had heard this a lot about rooms in comedies, that they weren't very cooperative, that they were actually there was a lot of competition in the rooms because it was all about whose joke got to be on the show.
Right. It's like a status thing.
I've heard that before.
Who's funnier?
I've never experienced it. I never worked in a room on a comedy, but Joe and I did when we started, but that was a whole different thing. But like a big network comedy show, like I've heard that was often the case on a lot of shows, that it was kind of more of a competitive rather than a cooperative environment. Stargate was not like that at all. It was 100%. Nobody actually really cared who got credit for it. That's why I said, like, my name or Joe's name or Brad's name or Robert's name might be on an episode, but there are all kinds of ideas in there that were contributed by everybody, right? And we didn't sit around saying, well, that was my idea, that was your idea, whatever. It was a 100% like group effort, to make it work. Because even if somebody had a really great idea and had most of it, there's usually at least one moment where they needed help, where sometimes it's just good to have somebody else's eyes on it. Like, right, like you get so into a story and so caught up in it that you've got an idea, you might not be able to see some problems, but if somebody on the outside can sort of take an objective view, see the problems and help you fix them. So that was, so we would, like I said, we would do that. We would break the story, get the act breaks, get the beats. Then somebody would have to go off and write a draft. Well, actually, I guess we wrote outlines. Essentially, the what was on the board was essentially a bullet point version of the outline. But then I guess we fleshed them out. I think at some point we stopped doing outlines because we just done so many and we all knew what we were doing. And other writers who came in who weren't in the room all the time would have to do outlines, obviously. But typically, I don't even know if we always.
How many days?
Did outlines, but let's say we did outlines, and then we would read the outline. And normally it was just what was on the board, so there really wasn't much to do at that point in terms of getting notes. But everybody would read it, and if it was maybe a writer who wasn't one of us, it was wasn't a regular writer. I mean, by regular writer, I essentially mean, there was me, Joe, Brad, and Robert were the only four people who were there from my beginning, not the beginning of the show, because we missed the first 3 seasons, but from the moment that Joe and I arrived till the end of the series, the only people who were always there were the four of us. Other writers came. We had great writers, like Carl and Martin and who contributed awesomely, but we were sort of the core group. So I don't know if I forget what I was trying to say, but essentially, so you take your outline. I was talking about other writers. So give notes on the outline. So if there's any problems, if there's anything that's been added that wasn't on the board, and sometimes there would be stuff would have to be fleshed out, and you might notice a problem and say, well, okay, we have to fix this. But usually the outline process was pretty much a formality at that stage. The real thing is the first draft. Is now somebody's got to write the first draft. So like I said, if it was an individual idea, if I came in with an idea, most likely I would be the one to write the draft. The bigger stories that were the arc stories that were kind of more by committee, they would just sort of get assigned, like who's free, who's got the time to do it. Okay, you go write it, and this will be your episode. But and again, we made sure to kind of to sort of evenly distribute that kind of stuff and keep it fair and everything. But
I have a couple of questions about that. How long did
we can come back to that. But then so you write a draft and then you give it to the group. Like none of this is all just the room, right? At this point, nobody else is involved. The network's not involved. Nobody else has read it. It's just us. And I don't know how many drafts. I don't think we did that. I mean, maybe more early on, but as the show went on, certainly amongst the four of us, we had sort of gotten to the stage where we all knew what was coming. Like we knew there was a level of trust and sort of, being able to sort of anticipate exactly what someone would want or not want in a story. Like, I could tell if I was writing a beat that Robert or Brad would object to, because I knew them and I'd worked with them enough that we got to the point where you didn't need to do like multiple drafts because the first draft would be typically pretty solid. But you'd get notes from the room. And I think usually a second draft, I want to say, I don't remember specifically, but somewhere in a second draft stage, you would then like put the script out, right, to the world, to the production. And there might be issues that would arise. We didn't get notes from people, in the production, but they might point out problems, in terms of locations or sets, or that would require changes to the script. But that would be once we were sort of in prep and we were doing meetings. I don't remember at what stage the script would be like locked. And then after that, so you always had to lock the script. And then after that, if you hadn't made any more changes after that, they would have to be those colored pages.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen that. So the people would track, because that was once prep had started, so that all the departments would know, a change has been made for whatever reason. So everybody so you get those blue pages and pink pages. And I think it went to goldenrod. I think it was like pink, blue, green, yellow, and then I always remember goldenrod was like the last one. And then you would start doubling. It'd be like double blue, double pink. And if you got the double goldenrod, that was
wow.
That meant you had done a lot of revisions. I don't think that happened very often on Stargate. I think if it ever did, we probably would have talked about it. But I just remember the phrase "double goldenrod" was not a good. Like, oh my God, this one went to double goldenrod. But a lot of that was at that stage. It was mostly production issues. Like I said, it was. We lost that location. We can't use that location. Well, it's like, well, this doesn't make sense if I don't have that location. Now I've got to make a change based on the fact that, and some of them would even happen on the day, like, something would come up and we'd have to make a change on the day. And so that would be another set of pages would come out. But for the most part, I think within the core group of writers, like I said, the guys that were there through the whole thing, probably one or two drafts, and then you would lock the script, and then you would go from there and make sort of smaller changes that were. Oh, actually, I guess before we locked the script, we would get notes from the network. I assume. How did that work? I forget at what stage in the process that was, but there was that. We would deal with their notes first before we sort of moved on to the production side of things, just in case there was any big issues. You wouldn't want to go down the road of prep and then have the network say, we hate this episode.
Oh God.
So we probably, again, I don't really remember it ever being like a huge issue. I mean, we did notes calls with the network, and I think we talked about this last time.
Yeah.
There was the time that Brad tried to crawl out the window, but for the most part, it wasn't that bad. Looking back on it now, there were some notes calls that were difficult, but it didn't. We never had to start over. It was never like page one rewrite because the network hates this. We never did that. So at least I don't remember ever doing that. So like I said, for us, typically you'd get to the stage of prep and having people read it and working on it as a group, as a bigger group, really after just a couple of drafts.
Okay.
Was pretty typical. I would say one or two drafts. Well, I'd say a second draft with maybe some small changes after that. Part of the problem was we were just moving fast, right? Like 22 episodes at the beginning, and then it dropped down to 20. But as it dropped down to 20, then Atlantis came along. So we were actually doing 40 episodes for 3 years.
3 years.
Where they overlapped. and then Rob and Brad were doing the movies. So, you know, it just was very busy. And I've said this before, like, excuse me, but once you start production, it's okay because we would always start our room before production started. We would come in like January after the holidays. The show would start shooting, I think, in like March typically. But January, February was just us. It was just the writers. And we try to get as many stories broken and written as possible because once you start, you have a production schedule and more importantly, a post-production schedule that you cannot back out of. You have to deliver this version of the episode on this date, and you have to deliver this version, and the sound mix is here, and it's like boom, 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 and you can't mess with that. So once you have to feed the machine, right? So you got to get writing. So you don't have time to like fart around with 10 drafts. We just couldn't do that. It would have made the show impossible to produce.
When you were writing one of your, like, let's take one of your single stories for an example, like between the arcs and everything else. Right. First of all, how many acts would you, when you were really into the thick of this, how many acts could you typically write in a day? And did you ever write an episode out of order, or did you just go straight through it? Was there ever, not specific scenes that I'm asking for, but were there ever circumstances where it's like, I really want to see how this scene goes out, I'm going to write this first? Oh no! You can't hear me again. What the heck happened? This is so crazy, guys. I'm so sorry about this. This is so weird. Hang on just a second, y'all. I don't know what's happening. It's like everything is normal on my end. It's like it's all broadcasting, and then.
Well, I mean, we could just continue like this, because I can hear you and you can hear me. You can just talk to me on the phone.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you have? Is it an iPhone that you've got, or?
Yeah,
okay, let me see if I can FaceTime you, because the audio quality should improve.
is it working? Hello?
Yes, that audio is much better.
Okay.
All right.
It's a bit weird, but okay.
Okay. Let me make sure that I got the levels for everybody here. Say something, Paul.
Hello. Testing.
All right, sweet. So that's just how we'll do this. Sorry, everybody, but we will do some checks next time if we ever have to do it this way again. So, Paul, let me get back to you on the screen here. Okay. My question is typically how. Let me reformulate. This is all new for me too. Okay, so how when you're writing like an episode on your own, that's outside of arcs or anything else. How many drafts would you? How many drafts could you typically get in to writing in one day? And would you always write linearly, or would you sometimes write some of the acts out of order depending on your interest in the product?
Oh no, because we would break the story first and have the outline. I would always write in order. I would just follow the outline. Really, honestly, the hard part is breaking the story.
Okay.
At least that's how I remember it mostly. Like once you had a solid outline, you were kind of just following that and filling in the blanks. Then every once in a while there'd be some TBDs in the outline that you kind of leave up to the writer, and and then in the moment you'd be like, oh, that's we should have talked more about this because this is actually a problem. And then I'd just go and talk to the guys about it, whatever. But in terms of like writing, how much writing in a day, I think it typically took me until about 2 weeks to turn around a draft. I think that was about normal.
Okay.
I do remember writing a couple episodes like over a weekend just because it had to be done. But not usually. Like that would be pretty unusual to do that. That might have happened because some kind of change in the schedule happened, and an episode that was going to shoot later is now shooting sooner, and you got to write it really fast. But yeah, I think 2 weeks. I don't know. I think 2 weeks probably sounds about right from sort of once you got the outline to a draft, or it might have even been faster than that sometimes. like I said, to me, the hard part was breaking the story.
Mm-hmm.
It was once you had, and that was the whole point of the process, because once you had that outline, it was actually relatively, I don't want to say easy, but straightforward to write the script. I mean, you still had to, there still was nuance that wasn't on the board. There still was dialogue that you had to come up with, and humor and emotional beats and things like that weren't necessarily on the board, or just sort of written but not fleshed out in any way. And you still had to attack the scenes. By attack the scene, I mean, sort of on the board, you might say, okay, this is what happens in a scene, who's in the scene and what they're talking about. But when you sit down to write it, it's like, okay, well, there's actually now this scene itself has a structure to it as well. Should I start with this person saying this, or should that come in halfway? That's what I mean by the attack on the scene, because that can really make or break a scene, and that would take some thought. Obviously, that wasn't on the board necessarily. That was something that whoever was writing the individual episode would have to come up with. But like I said, we got to the point where, we had such great writers on the show that it was never really an issue. It was pretty rare to do an outline and then get a draft that was disappointing, that didn't pay off what we had done in the outline. If that happened, it was because there was a new writer who just wasn't quite up to speed on everything yet and hadn't learned just sort of the rhythm of the show and the way it all went down. Brad and Robert and Joe and I, and eventually Carl and Martin too, and a few other people, we all had that. We knew sort of the nuance, what would work and what wouldn't work. So it was very rare to get a draft from an outline and go, oh, this isn't what we talked about. In fact, it never happened. Like I said, because we were all in the room together breaking the story, we were all sort of signed off already at that stage. And then 9 out of 10 times the script would be like, oh, this is awesome. This would be like, you'd read the draft that Brad or Robert did from the outline, and it'd be like, this is even better than I thought it was going to be, right? Like these moments, because on the board, it's like I said, it's bullet point. It's not that interesting. It's your job at that point to make it interesting.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to follow the outline, but you're going to do it in a way that's engaging and fun and interesting and emotional and all those things. But we just happen to have writers who could do that. That's why the show went as long as it did, right? There's no getting around. We had a great group of guys who complemented each other really well, got along really well. I mean, again, I've heard stories from other writers' rooms where that didn't necessarily happen, and I think we were lucky. I think chemistry is a weird thing, right? And it happens with casting. It happens with a lot of things, with your even in your production, even in your like department heads. Like everybody has to work together, and that was one of the great things on Stargate, is we got to the point where the production side of things was such a well-oiled machine, because we weeded out the people who didn't work, and by the end we just knew what everybody knew exactly what to do. And but from the writing standpoint, from a writer's room standpoint, it's actually pretty amazing to have 4, 5, 6 guys. We did have women write on the show, but like I said, the four of us were, I consider to be sort of the core, who worked that well together and who meshed that well together, both personally, because a lot of the room is just hanging out, right? Like a lot of it's just, like I said, talking about what we're gonna have for lunch and talking about what we saw in the news, and just being people hanging out. It's not all just the story, and those things have to work too. You know what I mean? In terms of like, you obviously want to like the people because you're spending a hell of a lot of time with them. You want to get along with people, and we did. We had a great time. I mostly what I remember from the room is just laughing. We had so much fun. It was just a lot of jokes and a lot of just it was good. It was good times. Yes, there were struggles. Sometimes the episode wouldn't be working and it would be hard, and be like, we need to get this stupid story fixed. We can't, and just like, sure, that happened, but I honestly remember mostly just having fun. Honestly, it was a great experience. It was a lot of fun.
Is there a story you can share about really what it was like to work under Brad Wright and Robert C. Cooper?
Well, there's no one.
Okay.
I can't really think of one specific story that sort of
exemplifies,
who those guys were for me. But like I said, I think we were all very lucky. All four of us were lucky that we found each other, kind of thing. Because Brad and Robert, they weren't partners, right? So Joe and I were partners. It was different for us. We were already writing scripts together before we even showed up. Robert was just a writer that Brad and Jonathan brought into the show, and just turned out to be one of the best writers and the one who stayed the longest, basically, from the very beginning. And when Jonathan left, that opened the door for Robert to take more of a sort of co-showrunner role. And then eventually we also did that. And that was one of the great things about working with Brad and Robert, is it wasn't just the writing, it was also showrunner school for Joe and I. Because they brought us in, like Brad early on, he was like, come to the editing room with me. You're going to learn so much in the editing room. You'll realize how, because he said, you tell the story in the editing room. And I was like, you do? And then I watched him do it, and I was like, oh yeah, you do. Yeah, it's an incredibly important part of the process. It tends to not get a lot of, people don't talk about it that much, because a lot of people don't really understand it. And the concept of writing is fairly simple. You come up with an idea, you write the script, but the editing room is hugely important. And then they also brought us into all the prep meetings, all the the department head meetings with the department heads. I was going to the stunt meetings and the costume meetings and the location scouts and everything. And it's like I said, it was showrunner school. It was like learning how to become a showrunner, and to the point where by the season 4 and 5 of Atlantis, we were the showrunners, because they had taught us how to do it, and they were both very good at it. And so that was fantastic. And a lot of that's just a matter of time. We were just there for so long. We had so many opportunities to learn things along the way, because the show lasted. You don't get to do that if the show goes 3 seasons and you're like a junior writer at the beginning. By the 3rd season, maybe you're doing some producing, but maybe not. And so they were very good about that. They wanted us to, I think they maybe just, it was taking a load off of them if we could do some of that ourselves. Like, if you guys can do the editing room, that's one less thing for me to do.
Correct.
So they taught us how to do that stuff. And so that in and of itself was amazing. The writing thing is a bit weird. It's a bit different, like I said, because they weren't partners, and and a lot of people who've never done it in the writing world don't understand writing partnerships. They're like, I remember Robert asking me, like, just how do you guys do it? Like, how do you, because for him and Brad, it's a very individual thing, right? You're sitting at your desk and you're staring at your computer and you're thinking up ideas and writing. Yes, we broke the stories as a group, but at a certain point, one person has to sit down. But in fact, when Joe and I started, we didn't do it that way. We were actually 2 people writing at the same time. He would be on the computer because he typed faster than I did. His handwriting was terrible, but his typing skills were better than mine. And at that point, we weren't writing anything down. And I would just pace. And my office was pretty small. There wasn't a lot of room. We eventually got bigger offices, thank God. But yeah, he would be on it, and we'd be like, okay, scene 1, we're in the briefing room. Who's there? And he'd write, okay, interior briefing room day. O'Neill is there with blah, blah, blah. And so Hammond walks in. What does he say? And we just say dialogue to each other, and he would type it down. Now, eventually we did stop doing that. I think we talked about this before, that when we just got so busy, it was faster for us to both just write at the same time on different episodes. So he'd be writing one episode, I'd be writing, and we could do that at the same time and get 2 episodes for what would normally take the time to do one. And so eventually we did sort of go back to a more traditional way of writing, but we were collaborating, before we even came to Stargate. Brad and Robert had to find a way to work together, that was different. So their path to that was a little bit different, and you'd have to ask them about exactly how that all came about. And I think, again, a lot of it was just luck. We just gelled. It was just chemistry that just happened. We were just personalities that worked well together. I remember, Brad and Robert were also big golfers, and I was, and Joe was not. So Joe, unfortunately, was on the outside of the guy, and he made fun of us relentlessly every Monday, because we would play on the weekends. He would ask us sarcastic questions about our golf game, because he hated it when we talked about golf. It was like, I would fall back in his head. He'd be like, oh my God, we're really going to spend an hour talking about golf? Oh,
as much as I would love people, I don't know if I could work with them all week and then play with them on the weekends. I don't know if I could bring myself, even if I'm crazy about them. That's a lot of time.
I'm not kidding. This is not. It was special. It was a special group of guys, and we had Brad and Robert and I played, and we had the fourth member of our team was Mark Davidson, who was a
set decorator.
Set decorator. He was our fourth, and so we would play. That was our regular fourth. We played with Chris Judge played golf. We played with him a lot, and there were other people who played, but we were sort of that was our Sunday foursome. I know this isn't that interesting to people when I'm talking about golf, but it was a big part of my experience of working on Stargate and how I related to Brad and Rob, because we got along and we played golf together. I don't know. It's weird. And the golf thing, honestly, it was like the writer's room. What I mostly remember is just laughing. We would just make each other laugh on the golf course, because golf is kind of a silly sport to begin with. And Brad and Robert took it pretty seriously. Brad's a very good golfer.
Yeah.
I haven't played with Robert in a while. I don't know how his game is. Brad's is definitely better than mine. But for me, it was just good times. It was just fun. We just made each other laugh. Mark was hilarious, and Mark was he was a really good golfer, but he seemed to be really lucky. He was one of those guys, like his ball would go into the woods and it would just kick right back out in the middle of the fairway and be like, that's just Mark.
I got to know him on the auctions, just selling off the Stargate stuff, because he helped us organize that. He's a terrific human being.
Yeah, no, he was, and he made a great counterpoint to the three of us, because we were all writers, and and he was not a writer, and anyway, whatever. So that was a big part of my relationship with Brad and Robert. But strictly from the show point of view, I think really what I don't know. Like I said, first of all, they were very generous, showing us how to become showrunners, how to become producers. And from a story standpoint, I do remember butting heads sometimes, mostly with Robert, because he's a very smart guy, and he gets, we just fought about ideas sometimes. We just had that, again, it's a sort of personality thing. It wasn't, we're still friends and we still played golf on the weekends, but in terms of story, I think I butted heads with him more than anybody else in terms of story. The worst were time travel stories.
God.
Oh, we had some epic breaking sessions on time. If it was a time travel story, you could count on it taking at least twice, if not three times longer than break.
Because of the logic of it.
Yeah. And I was Mr. Logic. I was like, that doesn't make sense. And they'd be like, shut up, and nobody cares. And
that's great.
I was Mr. Logic. They always look at me like, are you okay with this? Like, it all works for us. Are you gonna rain on this parade now and point out to us why this doesn't make sense? And I'd be like, no, it's good. It's great. And Brad and I were more like the science fiction-y guys. I think Robert was just a really good writer who could just write anything that was put in front of him, and he happened to fall into science fiction. I never thought of him as being first and foremost a science fiction guy. Brad very much was, and he thought in terms of like those one-off ideas I was telling you about. Kind of science. Brad and I both kind of thought in those terms more than Joe and Rob. Joe and Rob were just really good at writing the characters, so they would come up with ideas that were more driven by, what if we put our characters through this or that or whatever, as opposed to just a pure science fiction idea like I don't know, like those one-off episodes that we were talking about before. So everybody was bringing something different to the table, kind of thing, and it all just clicked.
Wow.
And like I said, there's the evidence is the 14 or however many seasons. No, what is it? 17 seasons.
You did 14.
Right. So that just doesn't happen unless you guys are working well together. Like it never would have gone that long if we weren't clicking on a level that I don't really understand per se. I couldn't make it happen, right? Like you can't, that stuff just kind of, I'd say, like I said, I think we were lucky that we just gelled really well.
I had you go back through season 4,
right.
this past week, 7, 8, 9 days. You watched Point of No Return, The Curse, Chain Reaction, Prodigy, and Exodus. What was your overall impression of going back through and looking? I think you said like it was interesting or something. Like I'm interested in how you characterized it, going back and looking at those first few.
Yeah. So the last time we talked about, I was thinking the very first episodes, like the ones like Window of Opportunity and Tortures, which we pitched before we were even in the room. The other episodes were like we're talking about the room and how it worked and everything. Exodus, for example, is a good example of a big episode that's an arc-driven episode, right? So that's, even though we're credited with writing that was very much one of those written by committee type of stories that I was talking about. I mean, I don't remember who actually physically wrote. I guess we were still writing together at that point, so we were the ones, Joe and I wrote it on, in the room together. But it was that story was a group effort kind of thing. We were just assigned it. They were like, you guys write this one. It wasn't like we came in with the idea for Exodus, right? This was part of, this backstory with the Tok'ra and everything like that. The other episodes, so Point of No Return was, I think it was just, I don't remember whose, it was either me or Joe's idea. It was just, wouldn't it be funny if somebody knew about the Stargate, but play him as like a conspiracy? Because one of the things that we liked about the show was that it was contemporary. It was set on Earth in the 2000s, right? So it was like you could do stories. We always like to do Earth-based stories anyway because they tended to be a little bit cheaper. But they were also fun. It was an interesting idea. Like, okay, this is actually happening on Earth. These people walk around and read the same news that we're reading, meaning the people who work at the SG at Stargate Command, right? They're living contemporaneously to the audience in theory, right? In that's sort of the key of the show. And so it was like, well, what if? Because we knew about all these crazy alien conspiracy theories and everything like that. And so the idea was, well, if somebody comes to them and seems like one of those crazy people, but actually isn't, and actually does know things about the Stargate that he shouldn't know. That's kind of the genesis of that. That was sort of where that story came from. And then we decided to make him kind of a nerd, and got Willie Garson to play the part. And he had been, I think he was on Sex and the City.
Yes.
Yeah. So he was a well-known guy, and we had seen him, and we're like, oh, he'd be perfect. And he had a nice chemistry with Rick, because they did all their scenes together, and there was a nice kind of Mutt and Jeff thing going on there between the two of them. It was funny, which was meant to be. It was, obviously it was a humor driven episode. What were the other ones you mentioned?
So the Curse, and I do want to mention Point of No Return. I want to insert this so that this is part of the oral history before we move on. I can't remember which one of you mentioned it, but like the Curse was, excuse me, not the Curse. Point of No Return was an episode that was almost exactly what it was in the idea to the execution. Like you guys had commented that it didn't really change a whole lot. Like what you had envisioned is really what that became in many respects.
Sure. Yeah, Joe probably told you that, and yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Okay.
The Curse was, I think, again, that was kind of more of a, so it did lean on backstory, but I think the origin for the idea was the idea of the canopic jar with the symbiote in it.
Yes.
It was probably from watching The Mummy or something like that. Yeah, I don't know if I'd have to go back and look at the years, but the concept of a canopic jar we knew about, and so it was like, because they had done, and I didn't, coming into the show in season 4, I had to learn that they did the episode Seth, and there've been references to Gold on Earth before. It's not just out there in space, and so somewhere along the way the idea came up of what if there's a gold symbiote in a canopic jar, and some colleague of Daniel's is gets the symbiote and is a gold on Earth. So that, I think that was the origin for that.
And you pulled from Egyptian history about Osiris and Seth, and what happened with Osiris and Isis. So you pulled from that, and it fed into the Goa'uld mythology from Egyptian mythology.
Yeah, I don't remember who did the research on the on the Egyptian mythology, but yeah, the whole thing was because I can't remember, like he was put in some kind of vessel and floated down the river
to the underworld.
like
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget exactly, and it was like, okay, so that totally works with this idea. I don't think that was the genesis of the idea; it just fit.
Yeah.
Once we started doing, I think the genesis honestly was, and obviously we had to make it be a high tech canopic jar, but it was kind of like the Mummy. It was like they talked about canopic jars in the Mummy, but the whole idea of being imprisoned, like your enemy being sort of imprisoned in this vessel for all eternity. In this case, it was just a symbiote. It wasn't a body, but. And then it was fun to, have Daniel revisit some of his backstory again, because this is a contemporary show is happening, and so it's nice to see that he remembers people from his past, and it was like there would be people out there who remember him and who would be like, where the hell did you go?
Right.
You went crazy and started saying dumb stuff about the Egyptian pyramids, but then you disappeared. What happened? And so it's like an opportunity. You get the idea of sort of the sci-fi idea of this symbiote in a jar, but then it's like, okay, well, now that's an opportunity to talk about Daniel's past and some relationships that he maybe left behind.
Correct.
And all that kind of stuff. And at the end of it, you get a villain who rockets off into space who can come back later. So, so it starts with something simple, but then you take all the elements of the show and layer them in, and you sort of open up new avenues for stories down the road.
Sarah Gardner was in many respects my favorite villain from SG-1. Anna Louise Plowman, I have wanted to interview her for years and have not been able to get her. And you guys did something with Osiris that was just, it was this kind of a substitution because Shari is gone. And so we need to give, a little bit more for Daniel to sink his teeth into and and introduce her that way. But what a magnificent role. She did a great job.
Yeah, she was fantastic. The moment that really when she appears as Osiris, I don't know. I forget who was our costume designer at that particular time. We went through a few different, but that moment where she's in that white, crazy diaphanous robe thing with the hood on and the way it's lit, that was such a great moment. It's like, oh my God, yeah, that looks so cool. And then she had the hand device and everything. Yeah, that was a cool moment. And she went from being, Daniel's maybe ex-girlfriend or somebody, and then, oh my God, now she's talking about the rivers running red with blood. Oh, that turned real fast. So that, I remember that line. I remember thinking, is this line a little over the top? And it's like, she's a gold villain.
Exactly right.
They get to say stuff like that.
Chain reaction.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It was great, and that episode was, I was very happy with how that episode turned out.
Absolutely. Chain reaction is one of my favorites because, are we good? Are you good on time?
Yeah, I'm still good. We started late, so we can go.
Okay. Chain reaction was one of my favorites because it elevated him into the center of the plot. We had another general who was brought in for a little while who was kind of a patsy, probably working with the NID and Kinsey. And it was just this great idea of, what if you had someone who was basically doing what the Rogue NID did, but he was on the inside of the SGC, blowing up Naquita bombs, and how long would it take for everything to go straight to hell? Well, it turns out just a couple of days. It was a great episode for Rick, for Mayborn, and you elevated Tom Macbeth and Rick. They were extraordinary. They were just extraordinary.
Yeah, so I don't remember what the genesis was for that episode, because again, that was not a one-off episode, right? Yeah. That wasn't one of my single sci-fi idea type episodes. It was entirely driven by threads that had been left before, right? The Mayborn character and the Kinsey character, and so I don't remember exactly how that all came about. The idea of them trying to take over the base. Actually taking over the base, really. What the big thing that I remember about that was Roddy Cox.
Yeah.
Because I coming into the show, I didn't know that much about the show. This is season 4, whereas this was all kind of new to me. I'm figuring out what this show is all about, and I was like, oh, this show gets people like Ronnie Cox to be on. Like, this is cool. Like, it really kind of changed my view of the show when I realized that he had been on the show. And that we were going to get to write dialogue for him, because for me, he was the villain from RoboCop. Like, and that was a big deal. I loved that movie, and I loved him in that movie. And I guess for an older generation, he was from Deliverance. They would remember him from Deliverance. But I just was like, it's the guy from
Dick. You're fired. Thank you.
Dick, what was his name? Dick Jones.
Dick Jones.
Yeah.
Out the window. Oh, it was great.
But yeah, so I was just very excited that we had this guy and had been on the show, and he was going to come back, and we were going to get to write dialogue for him. So that's my biggest memory from that whole episode.
Prodigy, the last one on this list for this season. We had Jennifer Haley, who was introduced. The Air Force Academy was used. We had Ivan Bartok in there as well, and it was just,
Ivan really. That's a singular moment for me and Joe. That, excuse me, ma'am, did you say 10 dimensions? That's a classic moment. Ivan, of course, went on to become, he produced DVD extras for us, and then also he worked with us on Dark Matter. So we've been friends with Ivan for a long time, and that seeing that scene again, I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that.
He was a baby.
I just hadn't seen it in a long time. It's a great moment. He looks so young. That's an interesting story. So I think this is an example, because I think it was actually Brad's idea. I think this is one example of what we were talking about before. I think we shared story credit with him, and he, for whatever reason, wasn't going to write it. And it's an interesting episode because it deals with the whole military thing, and that was a tricky thing for us because we were working with the Air Force, and we got an incredible amount of cooperation from the Air Force, and eventually they were putting us on planes and sending cool jets up to Vancouver and stuff like that. I mean, they did is that the one, was that the one with General Bauer? Or not General Bauer. General Bauer is the name of
so Kerrigan. General Kerrigan.
The actual chief of staff.
Oh, yes, General Ryan at the beginning. That's correct.
Yeah.
That was his show.
So yeah. It was that episode, right? Wasn't it? Okay. So that's the level of cooperation and interest we had from the Air Force. So we had to, even though we were all Canadian, so like all the writers on that show are Canadian, and we don't have like a really deep sort of military cultural thing going on in Canada. The military doesn't really register for most Canadians the way it does for Americans, right? So it was a bit odd that we were sort of entrusted with writing these stories about these characters. Brad was very, he was very cognizant of that. He was aware that, we had a responsibility. Like Carter, she had to do her hair a certain way. Like we couldn't just let her get away with even having long hair was an issue, right? Like, because the Air Force would be like, she wouldn't be allowed to do that. And she's an Air Force officer. Like, again, this is quote unquote real, right? These are real people in a contemporaneous storyline. This is not on some other planet where the military can be whatever we want it to be. This is the real Air Force. And so they're going to have a say if we do something really weird or strange or make fun of them or whatever. We didn't like making them villains. I mean, they could be villains like that general. I think his name was General Bauer.
General Bauer, yeah.
Yeah. So he was a bit of a villain a little bit, but so it wasn't like we had to like make everybody from the Air Force a hero, but we generally tried to balance, sort of our view of the military, because it's easy to make the military a villain in science fiction, like the guy, like I think of Avatar, the jarhead colonel who's
oh man, he's like mustache twirling for the sake of it.
Yeah, but it's very easy to fall into that trap with the military, right? To make them, because people who read and write science fiction tend to be kind of left-leaning type people anyway. They tend to be people who, they're open-minded, and they might look at the military as being something kind of old-fashioned or, representing a side of humanity that maybe in the future we should get away from, kind of thing. But we couldn't do that, right? We had to like be respectful of the military. And that episode is a good example because the whole thing with O'Neill at the end, where Carter's trying to explain to the cadet why he's doing what he's doing. It's like you might be right, but if you're right, he's risking all of our lives Whereas if you're wrong, he's just risking his life, right? And so he has to make that choice. So it was a lesson sort of in that kind of style of thinking, right? Which was cool. I mean, I liked that we could do stuff like that. We didn't do it very often, but it was just kind of sort of baked into the show that we had to deal with issues like that, civilian versus military, who gets to make the decisions. There were always civilian scientists, like in that episode, who were complaining about the military telling them what to do,
right,
stuff like that. But I think the important thing for us was just to deal with the issue with some sensitivity and know that there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer all the time. I think it would have been easy for us as a bunch of sort of slightly left-leaning Canadian people to just kind of really make fun of the military or make them be villains or whatever.
Like MASH did. That was always my complaint about MASH, is like the military were idiots. I think you really balanced it out, you know?
Yeah, well,
I think you were thoughtful.
That was a good example of an episode where we tried to do that, but I think that was continuous throughout the show, right? Like that we had to do that all the time, and that was just an episode that really highlighted it. But it was always kind of up there in the background and was an important part of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a handful of fan questions I want to get to. Okay. Pac-Man D3. I'd love to know Paul's opinion on whether he thinks the next Stargate should be a movie or TV show first, because they're going back and forth right now about it, supposedly. So,
God, I would probably do a movie.
Do a movie?
If it was up to me, I would probably do a movie and then see if it made sense to spit like the original. You know,
yeah.
It was originally a movie, but I don't know.
Okay. JS has a specific lore question. This is a little esoteric, but I'm curious if it rings a bell. So Marina Baccarin came in as Adria in season 10. Wanted to know if this is probably a Rob question. If you knew the meaning of the title of Orici, or who gave that idea birth.
You mean the word itself?
Yeah.
That was Rob.
That was Rob?
The Ori and the Orici were I'm pretty sure that was Rob. He came up with a lot of that mythology, and I think the name itself was probably him. Okay. Yeah.
He was the ancient guy, so yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. That whole he drove a lot of that.
Okay. Philip Kanat, in the era we live in now, would it make more sense to write a darker show, more political, grittier than in the early 2000s, or do you think we would still make it as humorous and funny as it was?
Well,
or funnier?
I think the show. I mean, if you look at like Universe, for example, Universe was already trending in that direction, right? It was a darker show. It was it reflected the sort of a change in television. I think it was more serialized and all that stuff. It was. I mean, there was still humor. I don't think that they're necessarily mutually exclusive.
Yep.
Dealing with dark themes and humor. But if you're talking about like a new Stargate, is that this is in the context of I think it would have to be a little bit more. People are just. It seems odd to say it now, but it feels like Stargate, the original Stargate, the SG-1, early SG-1s, seems like it came from a slightly more innocent time. It really does.
Isn't that sad? Yeah, that's really the reality.
It is. I don't know. I think you would have to be a little bit more, just not quite as lighthearted about it if you were doing a new version. I think.
If you were to do Stargate now, Thomas Suarez wants to know: would you write more big season stories into the show, or would you keep it as episodic as it was? Because it was always a hybrid. Yeah.
Nowadays, again, people are pretty used to serialization on a level that's a lot more than what we used to do. Nobody's really. I mean, networks are still doing episodic TV, but I don't watch network television. I haven't watched a network show aside from the sitcoms. Like, I haven't watched a network show in a long time. Certainly not dramas. And once sort of streaming came along and shows like The Sopranos came along and stuff like that, it just felt like the networks got left behind a lot, and there was just more interesting stuff happening in the serialized streaming world. that wasn't episodic. And so, yeah, I don't know. And the other thing is, in terms of like big stories, the other thing that's happened to TV is tons of money is being flooded into TV now. That, I mean, the budgets that happen now on television, we could not have dreamed of on Stargate.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Shows like, you know, well, obviously Game of Thrones was kind of the one that really started it all.
Yeah.
Where it was like, oh, yeah, you can spend $10 million an episode, and that's nothing. And it's like, oh my God. But, you know, in science fiction terms, like Foundation and things like that, you know, like there's just a lot of money being thrown at the screen, it seems like, when they're doing science fiction. And I don't think any of the streaming services are interested in doing small science fiction right now. Or maybe they are, I don't know. Maybe there are some. Let me know if there's some good
Absolutely. Stargate
shows out that should be what?
Back in the day, Stargate was typically between 2 and 4 million, wasn't it? An episode, if you really broke it down?
It started in the sort of the low, when we came on, it was sort of the low 2s, and by the end it was like over 3 million, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Of course, that was 20 years ago dollars.
Exactly.
So it would translate to more now, but yeah, I mean, when we started hearing the stories of the budgets of some of these shows that were happening, what was the one they shot it in Vancouver? Was I'm gonna blank on the name.
Give me some information.
Oh, damn it! Anyways, the science fiction show came to town, and it was one of those $8 million to $10 million episode budgets, and
was it the Jurassic Park kind of show? I forget whatever its name was. It was like the biggest.
No,
okay.
No, it was like it was set in the future. It was like an urban, like,
Lost in
city.
Space.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Lost in Space was pretty. It looked pretty high end. I suspect they were probably spending a fair amount of money.
Yeah, it was shot at Bridge. They had the Jupiter 2 at Bridge. So
it always seemed like everybody had more money than we did.
Right?
Although, in fact, actually, the budget of Stargate was pretty healthy. By the end, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
We got some pretty good support from MGM. They stepped up, and it wasn't a constant battle to be like, you guys need to save money. It wasn't like that. It just seemed like as the show evolved, streaming came in and these bigger shows started to happen, we were like a little bit jealous of some of the money that was spent.
Last question for you. Did anyone ever try to get a story with Daniel's grandpa back? Nick from season 3. Was there ever, like, did anyone ever bring him up, you know, as an opportunity? Like, well, maybe we could work him back in. It just never happened.
How did it end with him?
He went to visit the giant aliens.
Oh, jeez.
And then we never heard from him again.
It never occurred to me. I don't know if anyone else brought it up. No, I don't think so. Poor guy.
You're right. He's just out there somewhere. Paul,
some of the other characters were out there and then came back. He never came back. Too bad.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you know. Someone else brought up Lieutenant Tyler from The Fifth Man, which you guys wrote the next season. Would have been cool to see him again. Sure. But
yeah, that was a good example of what I was talking about before, the single sci-fi idea, right?
Yep.
What if an alien could make you think as a defense mechanism that he's your friend and you remember him?
Yep.
That was the genesis of that. You know, that was kind of a cool story.
That was a great story, absolutely. I'd hate to see it die, Lieutenant. It's a ton of paperwork. It's so funny. Paul, this has been terrific. I apologize for the audio issues. I'm going to test tomorrow and see if I can duplicate them. Hopefully not. But having you make some time for us and go down memory lane has been great.
That's fun.
Thank you, sir. You take care of yourself and have a great summer, all right?
All right, you too.
Be well.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye. Paul Mullie, everyone, executive producer of Stargate SG-1 and writer. Why am I putting these on? I apologize for the technical issues here, but I really appreciate you hanging on. It's been tremendous to have Paul on to discuss some of these older shows and go through this material with him. I want to show you something that we're working on right now. If I can pull it up. Let me see here. I usually don't pull the curtain back too often. But this is... let me see here. Whoops. This is the Dial the Gate archive. This is the beginnings of it, really. It is a breakdown of the YouTube chapters that we've been slowly implementing, that I've been slowly implementing over the past year and a half now. So when you go and you watch an older episode on YouTube, the episode is broken down into its topics. So if, say, Jessica Steen here, click on this, we've gone through and broken down each of the time codes where each of these topics are brought up so that you can find them quicker, and it actually assists with the YouTube search better. I just wanted to give a shout out to our moderator Tracy, who has almost single-handedly done this whole thing. Matthew was a big help earlier on. Tracy has continued to carry this, and we are implementing the chapter markers in the earlier episodes. So I'm going to really put my nose to the grindstone here in the next little while to break out a lot of these earlier ones that haven't been implemented. This one has already been installed, but a lot of them have not. And I just wanted to give a special shout out to her. To you, Tracy, thank you so much for all this work. This has been great. I've been experimenting. One of my genuine concerns with the channel is that I don't have transcripts, and now I think I have over 210 hours of content, and I can't afford someone to go and transcribe every episode. So I've been looking at utilities, and I found something called Otter.ai. And I think that it's going to do the job of auto transcribing the entire collection. It allows us to put in like specific keywords, so it's not going to know what a tokra is, so I can program it, and so that when it encounters the word tokra, it will put that in. And for the most part, episode names and everything else to capitalize those. But this summer, I'm just putting the word out. It's only going to get the transcript about 95% of the way there, 90 to 95%. I'm going to need a small team of people, preferably this summer when a lot of folks are off and have some time to go through and the library and bring that to 100%. So I'm going to start generating the transcripts probably in the next month here using the software and load them onto a Google Drive, and with them about 90% of the way there. And I'm going to need a team of 5, 6, 7 folks, preferably, to go in and manually read them to make sure that the punctuation and the spelling of all the Stargate content that the AI has generated is correct. And I'm gonna be able to pay a little bit of money for each one, but not a lot. So if that's something that you might be interested in this summer and helping us with, do me a favor and email me over at dialthegateshow@gmail.com. And I really want to get the transcripts off the ground for the Dial the Gate archive, so that we can really load the archive with the transcripts, so that we can make everything searchable. Like every time someone has referenced a specific episode or an actor or a situation, you can put in that term and it will be searchable in the archive here that Frederick has gone ahead and built for us. So if that's something that you think that you'd be interested in helping me with, you can either go to dialthegateshow@gmail.com or go to dialthegate.com and click the Contact Us page under About Us and get in touch with me. And if you'd like to earn some lawnmower money with me this summer, you have a background in in English or something that shows that you're good at punctuation and would be interested in doing this for a few months until we can get all 184 backed episodes into play, that would be perfect. Michael Welsh, young Jack O'Neill, he's going to be joining us this coming Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific time. So we're looking forward to having him on. He was a very last-minute add. Then we have Courtney J. Stevens, who played Elliot in Season 5 of Stargate SG-1. He's joining us this Sunday, April the 30th, so following Sunday at 12 noon Pacific time. So Elliot's going to be back with us. Courtney is one of the original interviews that I had way back when over at Gate World, so I'm thrilled to have him. Tiffany Lyndall Knight. So you will remember her from episodes such as Touchstone and as Revisions. So she's going to be joining us on May the 4th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. That's a Thursday because she lives in Australia. So she's going to be joining us her Friday morning. So Thursday, May the 4th, Tiffany Lyndall Knight. And then on Sunday, May the 14th, writer Tor Valenza, who's going to come back and regale us of more of his Stargate stories from when he was writing. He has uncovered journals from while he was writing on the show, and he's going to share those with us. So that's all the information that I have. Tomorrow, Jeff Gulka, who was Ritu Charlie in Stargate SG-1's Show and Tell, is going to be joining me and the Wormhole Extremists, the other Wormhole Extremists, for our live commentary tomorrow, which is going to be One False Step and Show and Tell. And so also, if you want to join us for that, all you have to do is go over to dialthegate.com or to the Wormhole Extremists page on YouTube. I have everything linked through dialthegate.com now, so I'm finally getting good at this. You can go down to the Wormhole Extremists section, you can click on that link, and it's even before I've made this public, it's just unlisted right now. You can already go ahead and get a jump start on this. So he'll be joining us for both One False Step and Show and Tell tomorrow with the Wormhole Extremists. So I'm really excited to have Jeff on. Thank you to my mod team, Tracy, Reese, Anthony, Summer, Jeremy. You guys are making this all possible. Frederick Marcoux over at Concepts Web, helping to keep Dial the Gate, keeping Dial the Gate up and running. I appreciate him so much. And thanks to my producer, Linda Gabber Fury, for all your work with Comic-Con and everything else that's been going on here. And my thanks to Paul Mullie for making this episode possible. Who asked me? Let me see here. Lockwatcher, looking for the size and the dimensions of the whack-a-mole time device square that I have from Window of Opportunity. So keep an eye on the comments for this article or for this episode. I will post the dimensions for that, Lockwatcher. I think it's like 8 inches, something like that. So I'll get a measuring tape after the show and post a comment under that. So look for that. Raj Luthra, I noticed that on the Wormhole Extremists YouTube channel does not have links to the Dial the Gate website. Well, I got to fix that. I'll add it to the list. Guys, thanks so much for being part of the show and getting these, looking for these details and helping us bring the channel to its full potential. And anyone who is interested in helping me with reviewing the transcripts that the AI is going to generate out for me in the next over this summer is much appreciated. Means a lot. This is a lot of content that I really want to get searchable as text. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate. I really appreciate you all tuning in and continuing to help the show grow. I will see you on the other side.